Hello, I'm David DeCosmo. Welcome to ECTV Live. I'm joined by my co-host, Rusty Fender. Rusty?
Good to see you, Dave.
Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, too, as well.
Glad we're back together
Another
here
year.
and celebrating the first holiday of the new year, which is a holiday honoring the memory through the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Kathy Hardaway joins us every year at this time to talk about all of the events that are being planned here in Lackawanna County concerning that observance and celebration. And Kathy, it seems to be growing every year a little bit.
Yes, and every year, depending on our theme, this year's theme is peaceful activism, and then we have a guest speaker, and depending on the guest speaker, our partners then have activities surrounding that.
Now, you are very geared toward the young audience. I mean, the fact is that, and we've discussed this year after year, that so many of today's youngsters, they obviously weren't alive when Dr. King was in the headlines all the time. And you have stressed that it's important for them to learn the lessons that he was offering.
Correct. And our partners, for instance, one of our partners is Friends of the Poor. So they're going to have an event on Martin Luther King Day at St. Mary's Center. Talk about activism. They're actually going to have a march there in the parking lot. And Geisinger School of Medicine, their faculty, some of their students are going to be involved at the Boys and Girls Club, and they're going to have different stations talking about social justice, having activities with the students. So it is wonderful that many of the school districts locally begin to recognize Martin Luther King Day with this day off of school. And then we feel it's our responsibility to have a day of service and to have activities for the youth while they're off. And so they really understand the holiday and the meaning and the vision of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Although it took 50 years to come around, we've come a long way. However, in a long time, 50 years. I mean, I work for the state of Pennsylvania, and of course the states are the first to offer Martin Luther King Day. But again, the smaller businesses, the smaller organizations have yet to come around to recognize that as a holiday, and that's really sad. It should be in unison. And I think we're getting there.
We are. And I say our youth, because of the day off, we've learned to engage them. And our hope is that the engagement of the youth will really make a difference in our future.
That's important because normally when you do have a holiday, the kids are off from school, but it's strictly their free day to do whatever they'd like and be on their smartphones playing their games and things. In this instance, you're really saying, okay, yeah, you're off from school, but let's utilize that time. Are there opportunities for them to utilize that time?
There are, and can I start by talking about our Sunday? Sunday is when we have a dinner at the University of Scranton, also one of our partners. And this year's speaker is a co-author of a graphic novel. And I must tell you, I didn't really do much with comic books as a young girl, so this was a new concept to me. But they call this a graphic novel in that it engages even teenagers, middle school, high schoolers. In this graphic novel, March is of the life of John Lewis, our Congressman John Lewis from Georgia, and the co-author, Andrew Aiden, will be our speaker.
Oh, that's great.
Yes,
yeah.
And though it talks, our budget doesn't allow for us to have Congressman Lewis, but Andrew was a real impetus for March because he is a comic book fan. And during the civil rights movement, particularly in 1955, when they had the Montgomery and Rosa Parks, and they had the bus boycotts.
Central High.
Yes, and there was a 16-page comic book that talked about the boycott and talked about Martin Luther King. And Andrew became aware of that, talked to John Lewis, and that was the origins of this comic or graphic novel, March. And this is a trilogy. We're emphasizing Volume 1, and when I say emphasizing, we are actually set aside 3 tables at our dinner on Sunday for youth to participate. We've given them free books of Volume 1 on Sunday to hear one of the co-authors, and we're following that up on Monday with a dialogue at the University of Scranton to talk about social justice.
So get it read first, and then you can come and can talk about
And
it
you
and other.
Couldn't have
Correct.
picked a better
Correct.
time with the death of Stan Lee a couple months ago. A whole new generation of graphic
Yes.
novels, i.e. comic books and
Yeah.
drawing books, is
Right.
now back again. The pendulum
It is.
swings. It's back in vogue again. This type of reading, this type of browsing.
It
It's
is.
amazing. You
Very
can't buy
popular.
timing.
This is very
Yeah.
popular.
And you can argue as to whether it's beneficial to have, just a straight novel or like in this case a graphic novel. The fact of the matter is, especially once again when you're trying to reach the younger crowd, they like it that way. And
That's
as
right.
you say, they become accustomed through it.
That's right.
Through the adventure novels of the
Yeah,
Spider-Man. and
absolutely,
things
sure.
Like that. But if it goes a long way in teaching them what things were like. And we talked just before we went on the air about a movie that's just been I guess it's out in some areas now, called
The Green Book.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, the Green Book was a list of acceptable hotels and motels in the South that would admit African American guests. And this particular movie has to do with a white gentleman of Italian heritage who is escorting a African American jazz pianist on a tour through the South, and it pulls no punches as to what kind of things they ran into. And the other thing that moves me a lot is when we see that when we think about that South, we think about the Georgias and the Alabamas and things. We don't think about Pennsylvania, and yet
You're right.
Pittsburgh.
You're right.
There were problems for
Until 1967, colored and white water drinking fountains. 1967. That's a stone's throw. 1967
Right.
compared to the 50s.
Sure.
And that was still in vogue then.
And if the people, especially again young people, don't appreciate what happened then they won't recognize what may be happening now here and there that ought to be changed,
Correct.
because there are still problems.
There are. And I think my generation, the baby boomers, were comfortable, meaning we lived with the civil rights and we saw things opening up for us and had opportunities. And I think this generation will be confronted with the potential of things closing or having to think about social justice, to also think about so far as racism or where they see it. And I know they'll be surprised as to some of the things they may encounter. My generation, and I will tell you, my husband was from Memphis, Tennessee. His family was from Memphis, and they migrated to Chicago. My mother-in-law, anytime we go to visit, went for Thanksgiving, and she sends food with us in the car so we could eat. And we always say, Mom, we can stop on the road and get something to eat. But that was real. This
She
Green
remembers
Book,
a time when she couldn't.
she couldn't. And my husband remembers traveling from Chicago to Memphis to see family and knows that his dad would go to the stops and make sure they could go in, or many times go to the back door to get food in the places they could stop. But she makes sure we have all the provisions we need because she remembers a time when you couldn't stop at a local restaurant to
Yeah.
get food or a fast food
That's the
place.
sad part. I grew up in the same generation where, I grew up with the N-word. I grew up with this prejudice.
Yep.
And I think we took a step back
Yep.
about 15 years ago now, and there's a whole new generation that needs to be indoctrinated into this.
Yes.
Mine is the generation you would expect to toss the N-word around. To expect to
Right.
talk about, the Malcolm X years and all that of the late 1960s, but it's the new generation
Right.
that seem to have taken
Right.
one step forward and 3 steps back. Don't you agree?
Yes, and education is so important, meaning I grew up in Scranton. We had very little black history, if any, in the public schools. And so therefore, parents and families, you really have to use sources as this.
Yes.
Or you have to make sure that your family, and I'm talking black, white, everyone, has to make sure they understand our history, American history, which includes Jim Crow, which includes civil rights. And those are things that I find myself trying to remind myself and go back and remember our history. So important to today.
And that importance goes beyond black and white, because you have more and more of a mixture of cultures in our country now than you've ever had in the past. You have, as controversial as it may be, for how people may or may not be getting here, you have a great influx in the Hispanic population, and that Hispanic is the word that covers so many different countries.
You're right.
People are coming to the United States through whatever means, and even their own languages vary.
Not only that, but it's amazing if you've ever looked for a job in the last 10 years in the New York City market, including the 5 boroughs of New York. Now, being bilingual, speaking Spanish, is a must for hire. I never thought I'd see the day, but the influx has changed now that you must be bilingual to get a job that doesn't even have anything to do with speaking or teaching a second language, but just to communicate as a peer with the people you work with in a multitude of industries is now the norm. That's truly unbelievable.
And you can look at that as something, gee, I hate to have to do this, or you can say, what a great advantage to have this ability.
Right.
I'll give you an example in Canada. In the Quebec province,
French and
if
English.
you speak French and
right.
English, you're
golden.
You're going to have
You're
a
right.
job, and you're
Right.
going to be fine.
Better believe it.
So you got to look at it from the positive point of view. This is an advantage, and hence this. Now the observance actually then begins on Sunday.
It does.
I mean, the holiday is technically Monday.
Right. And I'm the president of the Greater Scranton Martin Luther King Commission. So the commission, we call it our weekend. And so this weekend, we have the event on Sunday, and I need to do justice. We have a second speaker at the University of Scranton on Sunday, and this is a professor at the University of Scranton. He's new to our area. His name is Dr. Joel Kemp, and he is an assistant professor of theology and religious studies. He's also an attorney from Harvard Law School, and he is going to be our local speaker. We usually like to bring someone out of the area, and Dr. Kemp will be our local speaker. And I just want to mention, because we'll run out of time here quickly, if anyone wants to come to the dinner, 2:30 p.m. this Sunday, January 20th, you're welcome to come. Tickets are available. And the Martin Luther King Commission is now under the umbrella of the Scranton Area Foundation. And so
great.
therefore you can go on the Scranton Area Foundation website under MLK event and purchase tickets for this Sunday.
That's great. That's a great partnership.
It is, and it is good for a small nonprofit as ourselves to be under their umbrella. Very helpful, and that's a new thing for us this year. But I also want to mention on Monday, I mentioned the Friends of the Poor having an event at 11 a.m., Peaceful Activism Youth Shop for Youth. And
A
then
youth shop?
For youth.
Okay.
Peaceful Active. And the Friends of the Poor, they're grade school up until middle school,
All right.
where the youth will be there. And they'll have a lunch for the youth there, and that is also in a collaboration with Geisinger School of Medicine. Now, since Dr. Marwin Waffa has been to the area, Penn State Scranton has also participated in the celebration. And they will have a luncheon and a discussion from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Scranton campus, the Penn State campus.
That is on Monday now.
That is on Monday. And you can also make reservations for that by going online at Penn State Scranton. And Dr. Waffa this year, he always does something different. The one year we had a discussion group so far as diversity. This year, what Dr. Waffa is going to do is after the luncheon, and they usually give awards to local people that have really showed themselves outstanding in diversity.
Oh.
And they usually go with a student group and then a local organization, a nonprofit. And then they're going to follow it up with a day of service. Also, United Neighborhood Centers is having all day long in cooperation and collaboration with the ARC, a food drive. So if you have any food that you want to donate, please bring that to UNC, and that's their community service building at 410 Olive Street in the city of Scranton.
And this is the second year you indicated to me earlier for that.
With the food drive.
How did that work out on its initial year?
Well, it works out well. United Neighborhood Centers has the food bank on Olive Street.
Right.
And so people are accustomed. They also have Angel Attic there.
Yes.
And so they
So
wanted...
the clothes are available to...
Correct.
Yeah.
And so they already have the pipeline to bring in food.
They've done a wonderful job over the years. I know I've covered some stories there. And they get a lot of donation. I'm surprised at the amount of clothing that was donated. And I know there have been separate drives for clothing for like winter and things like that, but this is more a routine, ongoing thing, and almost daily dress kind of wear that you might use in an office building, just going shopping or something like that.
Right, and they're known for that, and we appreciate them as a partner, complementing what we do with the food drive. And then, as before I mentioned, the University of Scranton is one of our partners. They're having a youth dialogue on race, injustice, and community from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. And they have a political dialogue working group there that I've participated in, and they're going to extend this to middle school and high schoolers. And that will be also students that have participated at the dinner and have read the book, March. And I'm looking forward to participating in that, something different. And it's always pretty exciting to see as youth start thinking about the issues of injustice and race and community, how they apply it to their lives. And I would love to hear some of their thoughts after reading, after listening, and then their own concepts. Yes, I'm looking forward to that. And we ourselves always have a march. This started by Sister Adrienne Barrett. I remember as a child.
Woman.
Yes, Sister Adrienne. We have a banner. Some youth at UNC have produced a banner for us, and at the front of the march is going to be the banner. But I can still visualize Sister Adrienne at the front of that.
Yes,
and
yes.
she marched with everything she had, and she led that march. I've led the march a few times, not as well as Sister Adrienne.
Well, I
did, for
think
sure.
that march is very important because initially we said, the young people today were not alive when Dr. King was active, but one of the things you remember about him was the march.
Yes.
And so that was kind of a hallmark of his approach to trying to bring people together. And so that's especially good in a commemoration, I think.
It is, and that's at 4:45 on Monday, and p.m., of course.
Starting and ending where? Where are you going?
We start on Olive Street at UNC, and that would be 410 Olive Street, and then we walk up Olive Street and go down North Washington Avenue to the courthouse.
Okay.
So we walk about 2.5 blocks. Then when we get to the courthouse, usually some dignitaries, Pat O'Malley has been there as a county commissioner, usually one of the judges of the Court of Common Pleas is there, the city of Scranton has a representative, and they will just share so far as civil rights, so far as diversity is concerned. Sometimes we sing some songs. The chaplain, usually I know from the prison, was there, and he led us in prayer. And that then leads us to our evening church service. And there are people that say, hey, Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister, and the appropriate way to end off this day is in church. And so we will have a service at Bethel AME, which Bethel, I'm going to give Cooper's a plug, but if I say, it's a church across from Cooper's Seafood, everyone knows what I'm talking about. So it's at 716 North Washington Avenue. And that interfaith service starts at 7 p.m. And they are having Bishop Ray Johnson. Bishop Ray Johnson is the pastor of a local church here in West Scranton, and he'll be the speaker for that.
Well, it's a couple of days full of exciting events, and I'm sure there are probably some others. By the way, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but have you heard of other events in other areas that are being held? I don't know if anybody else communicates with you as to whether they're doing anything, for instance, in Luzerne County or Wyoming, or.
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
Well, it would be good if perhaps some of them can latch on to that. And I think this idea of trying to bring people together is, as Rusty said, it is more important now than ever. And I'll give you a very small example. You have a situation in Luzerne County, in the city of Wilkes-Barre, where you've got 3 high schools that are going to disappear and all merge into one. And you know, the first thing you hear when about that is, well, my football team is gone.
That's right.
My basketball team
And
is
they're not
gone.
even staying in Wilkes-Barre, it's Plains
And
Township.
they're
They're moving
coming
even out of the city.
out of the physical
That's
city
right.
into the surrounding township. Now, that may seem like a stretch to go from the efforts of Dr. Martin Luther King to try to combine the classes of 3 different high schools. But you know what? There's a close tie there.
Yes.
You're right.
To bring all those students together under
Yeah.
one roof. Yes, it is. And I think the school board and the administration are going to work very hard to make that happen.
Yeah, I think they've really got to do that to make it happen.
And we're a week out, but the weather looks good for this too. A chance of some light precipitation Thursday into Friday, but once again, look outside.
Okay.
We don't have the foot of ice on the side of the road. We don't have snow piles everywhere. This has been so far one of the mildest
I don't
winters
know,
ever.
Rusty. I listen to the weather.
Ah,
Someday we might have some snow, but
Remember, you can only
I'm a woman of faith, so I'm praying,
You can
Rusty.
only accurately forecast weather 24 hours in advance. So just remember that. That's all. So these 7-day forecasts are just an educated
not
guess.
to believe them. Okay.
I
right ahead.
love the events. It's very kumbaya, but let me touch on this too. Are we still, realistically, especially in an area like ours, facing discrimination problems? Do we still have them? And I don't mean you to say yes in spot A such and such is happening, but
I think there's still work to be done. But one of the things I feel is our youth need the education to understand what's gone in the past. And there are some things, for instance, I just read a book, and I think I may have mentioned last year, Mass Incarceration, the New Jim Crow. And that was by Michelle Alexander. And she opened up how the oppression of black men occur now with incarceration. So you don't have to, you can take away their right to vote through incarceration.
Yeah.
You can take their right to college funding, so far as loans are concerned. So yes, in this country, we still have work to do. I am a person, though, that believes you need to be at the table and to continue to sit. As you know, I am very local. I am very active in local activities and make a point to be there so people can understand. And I try to be a voice of positive and
Yeah.
represent the African American community as a native Scrantonian, as someone that's grown up here and loves our community.
You know,
But work is need to be
the
done.
real problem is a bigger problem, because the more you try and educate on American history and the problems of the South in the last 2 centuries, the more that high schools and colleges are getting away from teaching American history. That's the real big problem. And that one's really tough to address.
Yep. Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, and that's why communities, parents, have to be a part of this. We can't send our kids to school and expect public education to teach them all that's necessary, and that we have to be a part of that. And we're trying to take on that charge as the Martin Luther King Commission.
yeah, you'd like to see more done in the schools themselves. And I think there are a number of schools that, especially around the Martin Luther King holiday, obviously they're closed that day itself, but just prior to that day, that some will take special time
I
to
agree.
address that history, but it's not necessarily in the curriculum where they're going to do it all the time. And I've said that for years about our local history. How many young people, I casually mentioned the Knox mine disaster, and how many young people really know what
Don't
it
even know
was.
what it is. Absolutely.
And yet it killed our mining industry.
Yeah.
It did.
One of the biggest local events, and no one knows what it is.
So we may have to make more of an effort to make these things happen, and that's why efforts like yours are so important. You try to get them to do it in the schools, but you try to supplement what the schools do with extracurricular activities.
Yes, and the schools have so many demands and mandates already
that's
on
true.
their curriculum that they have to meet. And I do want to say that so far as the commission is concerned, one thing we're doing at our dinner this year is we're having a survey, an assessment to say, what are the needs of the community? What do we need to do? What age groups do we need to affect? And I hope that those that are engaged with us at the dinner will take the time to fill out the survey so that we can really get a sense. There are times when people say, well, Kath, you do a lot of things throughout the year. There's about 10 to 12 of us that work on this.
Yeah.
And we don't do a lot of things throughout the year. But is there something meaningful that we need to focus on? Because we do have to focus. And what would that be? Maybe it is the youth. We're doing a demographic question within the assessment, within the survey at our dinner. And I'm hoping to really get a sense of vision and need so that we can address the needs in our community and make a difference.
And you are right, though. The education, the first step begins in the household.
It does.
Well, hats off to you for a job well done.
You bet.
For those that didn't have a pencil and write down all the events, is there a site they can turn to get a rundown?
We do. We do have and if you would Google Greater Scranton Martin Luther King Commission, that we do have a website, that our activities are there. As I said, we also have a Scranton Area Foundation, as under their umbrella would have information there. Penn State University has their information.
Very good.
Good luck, Kathy.
Kathy
Thank you.
Hardaway, thank you so much
Yes,
for joining us.
thank you, gentlemen.
And thank you very much, Rusty.
Good to see you,
Glad
Dave.
to have you here. Mark McGlory, thanks
Mark,
for
thanks.
keeping us in focus. I'm David DeCosmo for ECTV Live. Till we see you again next week, here's hoping all your news is good.